And maybe we start around the AFC North.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
Probably, and the biggest probably talking point in the AFC North is not Pittsburgh, which good for them, good win for them. It's the Cleveland Browns. And we knew that they were a bad team. But now Deshaun Watson, who had historically one of the worst seasons so far as a quarterback in the National Football League, he is officially done for the year. Ruptured Achilles. He's done. And there's so much behind this conversation, Zach. So there was people that were cheering the injury, people that were booing him before the game. And then obviously there's the logistics of how much the contract of Deshaun is now going to rear its ugly head for this team. And you made up a good point about where they are for this year for salary cap. So we'll get into that. But why don't we play the first video? Because players like Jameis Winston and Myles Garrett talked about the situation. Got very, very complicated, maybe to put it that way. So Chris Canty was talking earlier, and I think he did a pretty good job of at least explaining that there's more context that needs to be addressed here. So let's play that clip and react on the other side.
Conversation for me to have, because I feel like the fans in Cleveland were booing because of Deshaun Watson's poor play, and happy that he got out of there. So hopefully the team can get better quarterback play. I'm not sure how much the 24 sexual misconduct cases factored into their emotions in that particular moment. But when I hear Myles Garrett and Jameis Winston call for empathy for Deshaun Watson, that's cringe. Where was the empathy for the 24 victims to his sexual misconduct? And then them being forced to relive that trauma after the Cleveland Browns give Deshaun Watson $230 million. Where's your empathy for how they felt in that moment? For how victims of sexual abuse might feel in that moment, seeing somebody being accused of something so despicable be rewarded in that fashion. Mm-hmm. That's the part where the players got to be careful with that line. I mean, LeBron James came out yesterday and talked about how lame it was for the Cleveland fans to boo Watson when he got hurt. Did you come out and talk about how lame it was with Deshaun Watson having 24 sexual misconduct cases? That's where you got to be careful as a player. Mm-hmm. When it comes to issues like this. And I understand wanting to defend your teammate. I understand that bunker mentality. You know, I'm in the foxhole with my guy, and I got to defend my guy. There was nothing wrong with those players coming out and saying it lacks class for the Cleveland Browns fans to boo when Deshaun Watson got hurt. Period, end sentence. Leave it there. For you to go out there and make calls for empathy shows a complete lack of awareness, and something about that has to change. It is completely insensitive, and those players who thought they were doing the right thing could not have been more wrong in that moment with their commentary.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there, a lot to unpack. And not saying that I'm agreeing with how everything that Chris Canty was saying, but the point that we're trying to differentiate here, and this is where the Browns, and for Browns fans, I just feel bad for in a lot of senses, right? Your team is terrible. You signed this contract with Deshaun Watson when all of these allegations are still going on in this process. And we know this is just the reality, Zach. This isn't how I feel about that situation. The reality, when you play well in the field, it kind of diminishes everything that could be going on off of the field. It will silence it, right? Yeah. But then there's also the fact that these allegations happen. So a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about what happened. And Chris Canty did talk about the allegations. There's no doubt they were concerning. So, and you have a lot of other people to think about in this situation, right? So I think what Myles Garrett and Jameis Winston on this case were trying to defend a teammate of seeing what he was doing, the work in the building. Like, hey, he was showing up every day. And they went a little bit too far, Zach. Is that fair to say, where it crossed that boundary? Because in my mind, if you said, hey, he shows up every day, We know what's happening outside of here, but he's coming to work each day and left it there. I think that we could, you can live with that, but it got a little bit too dicey there. And I think that there is a truth to that. Is that, or are we on the same page with that?
Exactly. If there was something of, I don't think anyone should be, cheered when they're injured, stuff like that. He's putting in the work, he's trying to be better each day, stuff like that. It was the Myles Garrett calling him, he's been a model citizen.
That's a part. Exactly.
That's where I think people really had the issue, is saying, oh, for most of his career, he's been a model citizen. That's when it's like, Myles, what are we talking about right now? Like, there's just no reason to bring any of that up. I think you're right. I think Chris Canty's right. You say, hey, he's in there putting in work every day. We hate to see someone like that go down. You leave it at that. When you start bringing up stuff of he's been a model citizen, he's been this great guy, that's when it starts to get past the point. And I think he just kind of put himself in a conversation that he really probably doesn't want to be involved in.
But we understand what's out there. Allegations, a lot of the civil suits, and then on top of it, that the Browns
football play. Very poor football play.
The Browns paid him a guaranteed contract with all this going on. Hasn't played well. Browns are one of the worst teams in football. And then on top of it now, let's talk about what it means. Adam Schefter was talking with Pat McAfee earlier, and they changed some things around, but look how screwed the Browns are cap-wise here moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the dead cap's like 100 and something million, but if he was to say, I don't want to come back, what would the money do? Then how would it go? Do we know any of that information?
Yeah, I have it all here for you. He has a cap hit in 2025 of $72.9 million.
No matter what.
No matter what. And he's got a cap hit in 2026 of, again, $72.9 million.
No matter what.
72.9, no matter what, the next 2 years.
What's that, 145.8 million over the next 2 years? That would be much bigger than the Russell Wilson.
Just under 146 million the next 2 years. Now, again, he's due next year. I think the cap, those are the two cap numbers, because they redid the contract at the beginning of this year. They pushed money back into next year and the year after. His cap charge this year is $20 million. So they pushed back some of that money to matching $72.9 million cap charges.
So right there, almost 146 million are due. Almost 73 million a year in dead cap. That then again, for those that don't understand what that means, no matter if Deshaun's on the roster or not, that's money counted against the Browns no matter what happens. So they're screwed with that. And then you made a point. They restructured his contract, Zach, before the season specifically for this year.
Yeah. This was kind of a year that the Browns thought that they had a chance to win the Super Bowl. They thought Deshaun Watson coming back, he would be at that level that you saw a Houston Deshaun Watson. Not necessarily. We've seen spurts of it, flashes here and there in Cleveland, but they expected to get back kind of that upper echelon quarterback. So what did they do? They moved cap money around. They went out and said, hey, we want to go for it this year. We're going to go trade for Jerry Jeudy. We're going to go restructure Amari Cooper's contract. They made all these restructures around, hey, we want to win this year. We'll figure out the rest of it when that comes. Now, as you said, Rip, we're 7 weeks in for the Browns. They have a single win. And you sit here, they now don't have that quarterback. He's going to be, even if you now are like, okay, we're keeping Deshaun, we're still believing in him because I guess with the contract, you kind of have to keep him. This is now a quarterback coming off who isn't playing well, an Achilles injury. So it's just, this is a horrendous spot for Cleveland to be in. This is kind of to the point of, even when, I mean, we were talking beforehand, mock drafts are talking about which quarterback Cleveland should target in the top 5. So Cleveland is completely restarting right now. This is a horrible spot to be in.
It's terrible. It's bad. And you made a good point here. And I think to give the context of it, I think Kevin McNellis said this right here. Said from the beginning it was a mistake. Even without the allegations, no other quarterback has missed that time and come back with any productivity other than Michael Vick.
Yeah.
When Michael Vick went to prison and came back and was with Andy Reid, one of the best play callers and offensive minds the game has ever seen, only did we see Michael Vick. I think it's a great point. Deshaun Watson during the 2020 season had 33 touchdown passes and 7 interceptions. He was a guy.
Yeah.
He didn't play at all in 2021 and then had to serve a suspension in 2022. And then he only played 6 games. And then last year, 6 games and got hurt for the season. And then now, once again, 7 games.
He's played 19 total games for the Browns. This is 3 years into this deal. 19 total games, and it's not like they've been that productive.
Oh, goodness gracious, man. And you know what? And the only one that can blame themselves for putting themselves in this situation is the Browns. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. That team should have been better, and I think it's a great way to prove it. The highest win percentages in the last year are 2 former Raven quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco, when he took over. And Joe Flacco was the backup, and now obviously the backup for the Colts. It just goes to show you they were winning with the roster that they had regardless.
I mean,
it's a mess there.
I know obviously we can move on after this quick point, but it brings up the oldest point in the book, it feels like, when we talk about the Browns over the past few years. Imagine if they didn't trade away all those assets for Deshaun Watson and they just stuck with a Baker Mayfield.
Gosh.
This team, the talent on this roster, plus you add in all the assets, those first and second round picks that you'd be using in the draft. Now, the Browns aren't the greatest drafting franchise, so I'm not going to assume they were all the best home run picks, but still you have to assume you'd hit some sort of talent in those opportunities. Then you also have that extra cap because you wouldn't be paying Baker this much money. So it really is one of those things where you sit there and you think, if you're a Cleveland fan, they had the guy who took them out of misery, and then they threw him away.
If there's one other thing that the Browns did horribly wrong besides giving the contract, was how they scapegoated Baker Mayfield for their issues as an organization.
Yep.
You almost derailed a player's career. And I'm not saying, I think even Baker talked about it. He was doing all the commercials then, and maybe there's more eyes on him. And people
he was a star.
Well, people wanted to then see him fail, right? It's the same thing in a different case. Like Travis Kelce now has become more of a villain to people than the guy he was 3 or 4 years ago, because the Chiefs are playing well, because of that they have won. He's a great player. And then, by the way, everything else he's doing and who he's dating, right? Baker Mayfield, what the worst thing he did was he played his ass off for your organization. He helped change your organization around from being an absolute shit show. And then how he's rewarded is you scapegoated him out. And guess what? Now he's playing like an MVP. Good for Baker Mayfield. And that's the reason why Cleveland has not been able to stay relevant since Baltimore moved here. And I feel bad for Cleveland fans. You got to live with it. And I hate to tell you, it doesn't look like it's getting any better when you look at the other teams in the division and who they have and the stability that the Ravens and Steelers have in their organizations. I think Cincy, as long as Joe Burrow there, they're going to be pretty damn good too.